All right, so chapter 19, section 2, notes packet, the revolutions of 1848 is where we are. The forces of nationalism and liberalism, which we discussed yesterday, erupted again in the revolutions of 1848. Beginning in 1846, there were severe economic problems in France. These problems brought suffering to the lower middle class, workers, and peasants. At the same time, the middle class demanded the right to vote, but the government of Louis Philippe refused to make changes. All right, so we're seeing a couple things that are coming together where we see economic problems causing people to be upset, as well as this desire to be represented. Okay, so some similar things that what we're seeing now. We're seeing a lot of economic problems, right? People have been out of work for a while, so I'm trying to get you to kind of understand this kind of contrast here. People have been out of work for a while. People are struggling to make bill payments. Some people are struggling to put food on a table. But we're also seeing people being upset with their government there and here, right? So I'm trying to help you to draw that kind of parallel in your brains as to why we should even care about history. Well, here's an example. A group of Republicans set up a provisional, which means temporary government. The Republicans were people who wanted France to be a republic, underline, a government in which leaders are elected. That is what America is, okay? The provisional government called for the election of representatives to a constituent assembly that would draw up a new constitution. Election would be by, underline, universal male suffrage, which means that all men could vote. That's what suffrage means, the right to vote. Okay? So they wanted every man to be able to vote. Up until this point, who could vote?
Men who own property.
Men who owned property, which means they had money, right? We got it? Men who had property, which means they had money. What these people are fighting for is, excuse me, forget about that. All men should be able to vote. When they say men, they mean men, right? Not in the context of all men are created equal, meaning men and women, right? Do we understand that? Sorry, my allergies are killing me today. So, the new Constitution was ratified on November 4th, 1848. I'm going to need to take a drink. God, I hate allergies. I don't get cold, but my allergies kill me. What's up, sir? So, where are we at? The new Constitution was ratified on November 4th, 1848, and it set up this new republic called, underline, the Second Republic. The Second Republic had a single legislature and a president who served for 4 years. Interesting. Kind of sounds like ours, right? Except our legislature is broken into two parts. We have the upper house and the lower house, right? If you didn't know that, we do. We have you'll hear the House of Representatives, and you'll also hear the Senate. Those are two different parts of our legislature. They only had one part, and a president. The legislature and the president were both elected by universal male suffrage. Elections for presidency were held in December 1848, and Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, called Louis Napoleon, won. He was, the nephew of Napoleon. You would have thought they would have learned, right? I mean, not that he has to be like his uncle, but you had a guy who was a little insane with power, and now you've elected his nephew. Awesome. Great job. Okay. So news of 1848 revolutions in France led to revolutions in other parts of Europe. We talked about this before, right? When one place revolts, what tends to happen? Other places revolt, okay? An example of that may be, again, it's a little bit of a stretch, but it is an example that you have seen recently with what happened during our summer months, right, in this country. You did see, if you turn on the news, other countries were doing similar things. They were having protests. They were having riots. Yes, those are two different things, okay? If anybody tells you they're the same, they're wrong. But you were seeing this around the world. Why were we seeing this around the world? One, the pandemic has hit all around the world, but what else? What was driving it? Only one person knows that? What started the riots / protests in our country? It wasn't the pandemic. Go. Police brutality is the underlying thing, right? Namely, especially the George Floyd thing that happened, correct? Again, I don't need, no offense, we're not going to get into a political debate over your opinions of what that was, all right? But that is what was a catalyst to a lot of our summer of turmoil, right? And even now, it's still ongoing, correct? It's not like it went away because all of a sudden the pandemic's lessening and people are getting back to work. We are still seeing it. if you turned on any news source over the last year, especially during that time period, like right when it happened, you saw in almost every major city around the world, there were protests going on, / turning into riots in some instances. Not all the time, thank God, but in some instances. So we see this concept of if something happens over here, it tends to affect over here, especially something like that, which is a human element. Somebody was hurt, somebody was killed, right? We see that kind of pops up all over. Justice for. We need to care about this. And people around the globe latch on to that. Do we understand that? Right? Make sense? Okay, so we see that happening around there. So cries for change led many German rulers to promise constitutions, a free press, jury trials. All German parliament called the Frankfurt Assembly was held to prepare a constitution for a new united Germany. The members drafted a constitution, but had no real way of forcing German rulers to accept it. As a result, German unification was never achieved. So a lot of lip service. We see this in government a lot too, right? We want to make people happy, so we're going to talk a lot. We're going to say we're going to do a lot of things. If you turned on the news or again, I try to be as non-politically, that's not my job here. Some teachers might, but I do not. I'm not a big believer in pushing forward any agenda. I just tell you, watch it, right? Pay attention to everyone, both sides of the aisle, as they say. Our president right now just spoke last week now to Congress, right? It was basically his first address to Congress since he's been president. He promised about 900,000 things. I'm exaggerating, but every other word in his state, I watched the whole thing. Most presidential first speeches are about 25 minutes. His was an hour and a half. And within that hour and a half, he promised bare minimum 20 things. I mean, it was promise after promise after promise after promise. History shows us what about that?
They're not all going to come true.
They're not all going to come true. There's no way. It can't happen. Do you understand? Even if they're the best things in the world, right? Again, you and your parents and I and me, we might love everything that he said, or we might hate everything. That's not the argument. The argument is, or the discussion is very simple. Politicians promise the world, and they rarely deliver the world, if ever. Do you understand that? Okay? It's good to have somebody who's pushing their agenda, or whatever that is. That's why they got voted in, right? Whether you like them or not, in our country, if they won, they get to do those things. So, plain and simple. So understand, when you hear a politician promise things like the Germans were promising here, we're going to do all these things, we're going to unify, and you're going to have a constitution, you're going to have free press, you're going to have... None of it really happened. Okay, so when you're paying attention to your politicians or who you're voting for, make sure you're paying attention to that. What are they promising? Can it happen? Yeah, he promised all this stuff, but what if that might happen? Pay attention to those things. This way, I love when people get disappointed. Nothing that he said came true. Well, if you thought it was all going to come true, that's your fault, right? And if you're afraid that, let's say you're on the flip side of that. If you're sitting there going, oh my God, he's going to do all this. If you really think all of it's going to happen, you're a little bit off, right? Because it will never all happen. It's impossible. All right, so interesting. Politicians have been politicians as long as politicians have been politicians. Promises are made, and guess what? Promises are broken. It's that simple, okay? So understand that, and we see that right there with German unification. The Austrian Empire was a multinational state. It was a collection of different peoples, including, you don't need to know all these, I will not ask this question, but just so that you see them. Germans, Czechs, Magyars or Hungarians, Slovaks, Romanians, Slovenes, Poles, Croats, Serbians, and Italians. That's a lot of people making up all of that. Why should we know all of that? Why do we have to, you don't need to know all the different people, but why is it a big deal that there's so many different people in this one area? What do you think? If you were a leader, what would you know about all of these different people?
They're going to get into fights.
Well, they might get into fights, right? What else? What's so difficult about our country?
Well, it's not equal.
Well, we can say that. But-
Trying to please everybody?
Yes, trying to please everybody. We are so different, right? We have different cultures. We have tons of different cultures in this country. We get different people that come into this country all the time. That's the blessing and the curse of the United States of America, right? We have all different cultures. It's very difficult to lead all different peoples. Does that make sense? All right, so we see even, again, why do we study history? Well, these people had to try to figure it out. Many of these people wanted their own government. Thank God that's not what it's like in the United States per se, right? It's not like every different, in this room alone, we probably have, I'm taking a guess, mind you. Let me just look. Without having real knowledge of where you guys really come from in your life, meaning not like, I know most of you were probably born here. Is anybody not born in America? Okay, I don't know. So I'm guessing we probably have, this is a guess, 10 different areas represented in here from around the world. That's a guess. It's probably more. Imagine if all of you wanted your own type of government in the United States. How would that work? That's just one classroom of what, 20 kids? You see what I'm saying? So these people are going to be very difficult to kind of rule if they're going to be already asking for this. In March 1848, there were demonstrations in the major cities in the Austrian Empire. In Vienna, revolutionary forces took control of the capital and demanded a liberal constitution. To appease the revolutionaries, which is never, in my opinion, a smart thing to do, but I'm not in charge. To appease the revolutionaries, the government gave Hungary its own legislature. In Bohemia, the Czechs demanded their own government. So what happens when you give in to one? If I have 3 children and one of them begs me to do something and I do it for them, what are the other 2 going to want? It's a slippery slope. You let him stay home from school today. Why can't I stay? Get to school, all of you. Do you see what I'm saying? All right, so now we see governments doing that or people doing this. Well, you let them have their own government. Why can't we? Well, now we're going to end up with 37 different governments, okay? Officials had made concessions to appease the revolutionaries, but they were determined to reestablish control. That's never going to end well. That's going to usually end in what? Bloodshed, war. All right? So if they would have just done the right thing, which was, well, let me rephrase that. If they would have done probably the easier thing, which was just said no and dealt with the ramifications then, instead of giving everybody their different governments and now trying to take, you ever try to take back power from somebody, right? My Rottweiler, I love talking about my Rottweiler. My Rottweiler is a 120-pound dog, big dog. I made 110. She's lost some weight, good for her, right? Stopped eating the Taco Bell when I offered it to her. So my Rottweiler loves being in our yard. We go out and play. She loves being out in the yard. When I open the gate, my Rottweiler what do you think my Rottweiler does when I open my gate? It doesn't. Here's why it doesn't. Because I don't allow it. I've never allowed it. You understand what I'm saying? My dog knows that when that gate's open, I go out. You don't walk out that gate until I call you. She barely listens to my sons if they call her out. Right? So that's a good thing. The second I start letting my Rottweiler go out on its own, let's say I don't correct her if she tries to step out the first time. What's she going to do the next time? She's going to go a little further. What's she going to do next time? She's going a little farther. What's she going to do that? Next time, I won't even know where the heck she's at. You know how hard it is to get that dog back under control if I let her go? Now she thinks, the world's mine. I can do whatever I want. I'm going to start running. You understand? So this is what is happening with these people. You've given them all these concessions. Well, we don't want to fight. We don't want to fight. We don't want to fight. But now what are you going to do? You're going to try to take them back? You're going to try to lock the Rottweiler back in the yard? It usually doesn't end well. Imagine if I try to lock my Rottweiler back in the yard after I've given the dog freedom. I might end up getting into a little tussle with the Rottie. And it ain't fun fighting a 120-pound Rottweiler. 110. I don't want to offend her. Big hips. All right? You understand? Makes sense? All right. So you can kind of, when you think this through, it all makes sense. Austrian military forces crushed the Czech rebels, meaning killed them, hurt them, destroyed them, and the rebels in Vienna. In 1849, the Hungarian revolutionaries were also defeated. So they came down hard on all of these people. Okay? In 1848, a revolt also broke out in Lombardy and Venetia, 2 provinces in Italy. They were part of the Austrian Empire. Revolutionaries in other Italian states also took up arms, tried to create liberal constitutions, and a unified Italy. By 1849, however, the Austrians had regained complete control over those 2 places. Italy was never unified. So we see a lot of revolutions pop up. We see them all basically squashed. Okay? Now, you might say, well, why shouldn't we be supportive of revolutions? I'm supportive of anything that is for the betterment of somebody's life, of course, right? But you also have to remember, if you step up, the government is in place to kind of keep things in order. All right, so just mark that and understand that. I think a lot of times, especially as we're getting older in this country, and we're starting to see a lot more opinions being heard, you're seeing people think that everything is a reason to fight the government. Do you understand what I just said there? Did I say that things aren't reasons to fight? There aren't reasons to fight? No. There are always reasons to make sure the government stays in check. But I think this day and age is turning into, again, my opinion, humble opinion, I think this day and age, people are picking fights over everything with the government. They are finding something wrong with everything the government is doing. I think that is probably out of line because I think that the government is doing some things pretty well. I think there's also some things that they are overstepping their boundaries. And that's where I think that's where people should direct their attention. It's very hard to fight every battle, right? If you can kind of figure out how to fight a battle and figure it out, I think that's the best way to handle it. So understand that. Is our country going through a revolution right now? What do you think? That's probably how I would answer it, what you just did. Not written, maybe. I would say we're kind of on the cusp of people thinking that we could see some serious blowback against the government. All right? And that's, I believe, on both sides of the equation. I don't care if it's a Republican in office or a Democrat in office. I think you are seeing some blowback on both sides of the equation. And so do I think we'll have a full-scale revolution? I do not. I think level heads always tend to prevail, and smart people tend to figure out how to fix things. Hopefully we will. But I do say this to you guys. You are, and this is not like a bumper sticker, you know, it's an old Whitney Houston song, right? The children are the future. You guys should be starting to try to figure out how to fix these things. All right? Not just let it keep boiling and festering and get worse and worse and worse until, guess what does happen? A revolution. You don't want that, trust me. All right, so we got a few more minutes in class. I will upload this video. I'm going to